So we said, well, what about having computer vision and pulling that in and actually keeping track of the manufacturing process as it's going? And you're looking at every single widget as it's created. And if it falls out of a certain deviation, you have a model that's watching this particular widget and it can stop the whole line, do an adjustment, and then start things up again. Hey everybody, I'm Brad Bussie, Chief Technology and Security Officer at E360. And thank you for joining us for the State of Enterprise IT Security Edition. This is the show that makes IT security approachable and actionable for technology leaders. And again, we have a special guest joining us today, Mark Aksel, our field CISO here at E360. And I'm thinking by now, backed by popular demand, we might just make Mark a piece of this show going forward. What would you think about that, Mark?
I mean, we got to renegotiate the contract, but at that point, yeah, happy to be here. Absolutely.
Awesome. So I thought we would talk a little bit about a topic today. So last season, we generally did about three different topics in an episode, but I'd like to start focusing a little bit more on industry verticals and make this a little more applicable to certain industries. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about manufacturing. And a big part of that is because we keep hearing the term tariff thrown around. And manufacturing is pretty susceptible to things like tariffs because of the supply chain. And that's near and dear to our hearts being in technology because a lot of the things that we do involve making servers, storage, network. And even if you're talking about cloud and things like that, they still are buying components that are manufactured and then they're put together. So what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about some different discussions we've had with clients and some of the things that we've learned from those discussions. So does that sound pretty good, Mark?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool.
I have my own opinions on it as I've recently become a tariff expert,
Yeah, yeah,
over the
right.
last, I guess couple weeks, I should say. But yes, absolutely. Especially how our clients are addressing it and some of the things and the challenges they've expressed and the ways they want to navigate it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and if you look at it, I'm always trying to think of how AI can impact just about everything. So we were talking about it, and there was a 400 billion, I think it was like 450 billion in AI-driven efficiencies back in 2024. Now, granted, this was pre-tariff, but I still think it's interesting to talk about. So we had a client, and I don't want to say who they are because I don't know if they want to be on the show, but they make a widget. And they have some competitors that also make a similar widget. And they were worried about being left behind when it comes to AI efficiencies. And I was speaking with the CFO of this organization, and he had been tasked by the CEO as well as the board to look into this thing called AI. And as we were talking, it was interesting because the CFO couldn't really come up with a good way of being able to leverage AI in the manufacturing of their widget. So in the conversation, I just asked a simple question. I said, well, are you manufacturing things? And obviously he said yes. And when he started looking at it, he said, how can I potentially make that better? And I asked, well, how are those manufacturing lines uh, being leveraged? And are they ever down? And he said they're down all the time. And I had asked, well, why is that? And he said, well, there are maintenance issues, there are equipment failures, and there are things that happen on those lines that are unexpected. And we had started talking a little bit about something called predictive maintenance. And I said, what if you could predict when a piece of equipment would fail or when it needs to be replaced. And that was something that he didn't think they had the information for it. But when you start looking at it, and I said, well, have you kept track of all of your logs about when things went down? Oh yeah, we've got information for 20 or 30 years going back. I said, well, it sounds to me like you've got the basic pieces that you would need in order to have some of that predictive maintenance. So, and Mark, in that conversation, we talked about a couple other areas that could be leveraged in manufacturing. Did you want to highlight any of the other ones? Because I know you have some thoughts about that.
Well, some of them were interesting too because it was you can put like sensors on these machines and they're going to detect abnormal behavior of when, weaknesses or fractures or whatever it might be for typically more of the disposable or replaceable pieces can go awry. And so we started talking about that, and we're going to look into that. But it's not, I'm not an expert on machinery and engineering, but we have partners that do help with those scenarios. And the other one was, kind of as you touched on the tariffs side, was predictive purchasing and
Yeah.
predictive alignment with it's kind of the easy thing you kind of learned in high school or whenever was buy low, sell high. Well, how do we do that at just the right amount to meet our quota without implementing restrictions on the machine equipment? Because some of them, I think it was this one in particular, like they can't just turn off the machine. It needs to keep running at a minimal rate to otherwise it's way more work if it were to be turned off and cooled. That's a nightmare for these guys, right? So as that goes through the process, they have to keep it on a certain rate. And we started doing more predictive analysis around, or discussing, I should say, predictive analysis around, well, how do you keep those running? How do you do those things? But then I got into more the security side of it of like, well, how do you protect those things if you leverage going awry and the data coming in? So we touched on several of those topics, but I know you wanted to kind of keep tariffs as on top of mind. So I think that was one of the
Yeah,
ones that he specifically um, raised an eyebrow at and was like, tell me more.
right.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think the other one too was we were talking about quality control, and they have a process where after a run of a certain creation of the widget, they'll pause and they'll actually pull some of the line and they'll look at it to see if it meets quality standards. So we said, well, what about having computer vision and pulling that in and actually keeping track of the manufacturing process as it's going? And you're looking at every single widget as it's created. And if it falls out of a certain deviation, you have a model that's watching this particular widget and it can stop the whole line, do an adjustment, and then start things up again, which I thought that was interesting. And then kind of to your point before, like supply chain forecasting. So with tariffs being, I would say a good word for it right now is erratic because you don't really know who's imposing what or if it's being imposed on them. So being able to ingest all of that information and knowing when to buy, uh, you know, like you said, buy high, buy low, sell high, whatever it ends up being. I think those were pretty interesting. And I know that these are things that anyone in manufacturing would would really like to know a little bit more about. So for our listeners, if you're in manufacturing or you're wondering why hardware is costing a little bit more, hopefully by the end of this episode, we'll shed some light on, how tariffs are impacting that and potentially how AI could drive some of those prices down, or at least help us navigate the overall landscape. So
There's
I would,
I'm gonna
yeah,
I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
jump in real quick with kind of an anecdotal tidbit that I was just thinking of as you were walking through that. So I have a 3D printer sitting right next to me. Uh, I'm as we talked about the last time, into gaming, all sorts of stuff. So I bought a 3D printer, and it was impacted by tariffs when I ordered it, or when I pre-ordered it versus when I got it. I got hit by a tariff, but it actually has a little camera watching these things print by basically extruding plastic in a very specific way. And it has a camera watching that plastic come out. And it's doing exactly what you said. It's going, hey, that looks normal. That was too much. Adjust. And it's real time, instantly making this feedback, which normally previously, back, whole 3 years ago when this technology wasn't aligned there, You had to do that as a human with your eye trying to figure that out. And it wasted so much time. And I had so many failed things happen. But it's also got another camera watching holistically at the thing. So when it screws up, because inevitably it's going to screw up, it's going to happen. Oh, let's stop the print and not waste all your material, which doesn't, cost me money every time I fill it up. And I'm kind of thinking, I'm like, wow, my little printer is basically tariffs and AI all built in, sitting here on my desk 3 feet, 5 feet away from me. But it
Yeah,
kind of draws that parallel to like, I could imagine how much it saves me. Now expand that to a manufacturer who does this infinitely more times bigger than I
yeah,
do it, right? So the dollar saved, because I know in working with a large pharmaceutical company, they're still manufacturing actually creation of the drug. They had it down to the tenth of a second what things cost. And if they could tick any one of those levers due to the millions of things they produce, that saved them money or cost them money. So that was an interesting, just like thinking that through of like a real life example of how these things are impacting me specifically. But I'm sure, many of our listeners in kind of the tech industry might be impacted by that too.
yeah. Well, and it's interesting too because you look at your 3D printer and how it has that built in, and then you're thinking, oh, well, manufacturing companies, they obviously have things that are far superior. But what we're actually finding is that's not the case. They're in some cases running off of equipment that's 30 plus years old.
Yeah.
It's not network integrated. It may or may not have the sensors that you were talking about initially. So some of these things we have to retrofit to be able to take advantage of some of the new progressive ways of potentially doing this manufacturing. And I think, pharmaceutical biopharma, they have a little bit of an advantage in some cases because I think their process is newer. And in a lot of cases, they have more up-to-date equipment. But some of these manufacturers, like if they're making a widget, let's say they're making a can, like you think, well, what goes into actually making a can? And is that such a crazy process that would need computer vision? And I would say it would, but do a lot of those lines potentially have something like that? I would bet no. So
Yeah.
this is,
And
yeah,
it's like legacy based equipment where we have to like almost air gap it and we wrap it around like a secure layer, which then only that can talk to it, and the rest of the world or infrastructure of them can talk to that layer. But we've gotten, I'm sure many clients have heard, we can't touch that machine. Or if it's too expensive to replace, think of like an X-ray machine, how many millions of dollars that costs. Guess what? That thing's running Windows XP. Like it's just what it's
right,
running. So
exactly,
you can't patch it, but we can protect it with a couple different things on there. And they have to keep adding and appending. They build hospitals around. I don't know if you've ever seen a hospital built from kind of the studs up. Those rooms with MRIs and all the things going on, those start first and they build around that. So it's not just a simple replace. It's like,
no,
nope, that's infrastructure level. Uh, I don't want to say catastrophic because that's not the kind of topic, but you can't just go fix that kind of thing. So
no,
how do we make more with what we, or how do we do more, I should say, with what we have?
right. No, that's amazing. So I think, if I'm gonna look at this from a like AI and a global trade, some of the tariff challenges, I'm looking at this as what are some things that we can do as an industry to help maybe offset some of the impacts of tariffs. So, what I would urge our listeners to think a little bit more about are just like a couple of things. So, if I'm thinking about supply chain and being able to optimize that supply chain, that's something that we're seeing in the market be effective. So you're rerouting or you're doing resourcing based on a cost or a specific duty or impact. I'd say scenario modeling. So you're going to simulate the effect of tariffs and the changes on potential pricing and profit margins. I would say you brought this up, but automated compliance, being able to have the AI enhanced customs classification, documentation, and what you're hearing me say is like saving time, saving material. doing some form of demand sensing. So adapting to how demands are shifting based on tariffs driving up prices. So maybe you don't make as many of the thing because the demand's not going to be there. So why would you create all of this stuff when tariffs are high when not as many people are going to buy? So we're also seeing some of our clients do some pretty interesting things, and it's AI led, which is, I think what was it, Mark? It was like outsourcing from China to somewhere else. I want to say it was Vietnam and India and a couple of other places that, uh, because of how high tariffs have gotten with China both ways, we're actually shifting to other manufacturing plants because the analysis and these models are saying you're actually going to save money if you do it that way.
And it's not just saving money in the future or the now, it's also future proofing, having multiple vendors um, or suppliers. Um, I have a interesting point of view on this one as well. And as the security guy, I always look at security and how usually starved our clients are on the security side of like, hey, we want to go do more, but we can't. We know we need to do these things, but I can only do it if it's based upon a regulation or the business will be impacted if I don't do this through a fine or a, whatever else. Um, I kind of approach this in this conversations I've had with security leaders is like, hey, instead of spending the money on getting all the new servers or getting that refresh, you extend your maintenance and repurpose that money for something that you do know you need, but you can actually leverage it instead of buying high and keeping what you want, push it somewhere else in the business. Typically, security will always have their hand up and say, we will help you spend your money. But when we look at those things, instead of refreshing your firewalls, extend the maintenance on it for 2 more years. Yes, it's not the latest and greatest. As long as it supports your business and it has the right patching levels and all those things, and maybe you can leverage the funds instead of that to go a little bit further. So stretching that dollar, those are conversations that I'm having with CISOs that are like, how can I do more? Because I can't afford what they're asking me to do this now. So what do we do? And in some cases, that might be a replacement, right? Hey, buy something that is no longer impacted by that. But then you look at the total cost of ownership and the implementations behind that might not be just might not be worth the squeeze. But it's things to think about and helping them just even think through that's an art of the possible. They start to go, huh, and we start pulling on the thread. In some cases, we fail quick. Nope, doesn't make sense. Let's move forward. Or, hey, you know what? That has some legs here. Let's investigate that further. So we're in the middle of several of those conversations where we're like, let's figure out if this really does make sense, or if we can just hold off a little bit on everything and kind of wait to see how the waters are flowing, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think channeling my inner security guy, I'm going to think a little bit about maybe some of the challenges and limitations that we have in this discussion. And I think kind of going back to the beginning, so much of this is based on data and the quality of the data and being able to leverage that data. And I think anytime Mark and I talk to a customer and we're starting an AI conversation, so much of it goes back to, well, what data are you ingesting, and do you know if that data is known good? So often when we're trying to save money and do some of these restructuring of things in not just security but in IT overall, I think a lot of those decisions are made on data. So making sure that it's good from the beginning, I think is important. I also think the more we read about AI models and how they make decisions and if they have any inherent biases, if it truly is like a black box type of system or model, I think that could actually pose a challenge when it comes to like specific trade scenarios or whether to make something, whether to not make it, whether to make it in a different country or not. So I think that's another potential challenge, or a limitation. And then, we've seen this a lot, which I feel like in some ways we're starting to have an over reliance on automation. And we've seen this, and I think manufacturing has seen this too, where, and you said this, Mark, where it was like having a human's eye on something, or at least having some kind of oversight. But what we're seeing is we're just like, you said this earlier today. It's like YOLO. We're gonna trust, and we're just gonna let this thing go because obviously, the model's been trained. Automation is fantastic, and it can just make the decisions because it's not going to make a bad one, right?
No, of course not. Never. You're giving away like how we talk to each other. Like, yeah, like if they could just record us when we didn't know we were being recorded, I don't know if they'd understand half our lingo.
But here's the problem. Half of the way we talk to each other is through memes.
That's true.
So if you're listening, you're not going to understand. And
Yeah.
actually, if you're watching, you may not understand either because we have
Yeah.
like 5 to 6 years of inferred memes about
Yeah.
uh, strange and different things.
Very
So,
true.
all right. Well, I think we're getting closer to the end of the discussion. But I think what everybody is always wanting to know is like, what's next in a topic like this? And I would say a couple of things that I'd like our listeners to think about is leveraging AI in things like, looking at policy. And I know we just cautioned about having data and automating things and not having human oversight, but I think we could use AI in something like trade policy. And we could have a strategic advisor to not just like a team of people. I would hazard to say I don't want it advising a government. But as far as like maybe a legal team on things that are and exist and are hard and fast, like yes, no's, I think an AI could do some interesting things, like provide some advisement on certain things like trade. I would be interested, Mark, to see what would happen if we had an AI examine our current trade wars and positioning and see what it would say about it.
I'm pretty sure sooner than later we're gonna have AI talking to AI, and then two humans, like, after it makes years worth of decision in the 30 seconds it'll take, we'll be like, yeah, sounds good. It's like, okay. But
Yeah.
no, I mean, we're already having that in some cases with the governance platforms. Like, hey, fill out the SOC 2 assessment for the 18 companies you do business with. And that's all AI on the back end, translated questions for you, bringing it. You just point it to your AI and they'll figure it out, right? And no humans
Well,
involved.
I mean, I wish for this, and I'm sure I'm gonna get because this is what normally happens. I wish, and then I get somebody on LinkedIn that sends me a message and says, "We have that. Would you like to buy it?" But essentially, what I'm looking for is as a CISO, I get so many third-party risk management questionnaires. I'm getting several a week, sometimes 10 or more. And I would love to just have our own AI where I give it all of our documents, policies, all the things about E360, and then our TPRM AI could just talk to another companies and they can have a conversation and say, yep, they look good. NIST 853 R5, it's been checked, it's been validated. Let's move on instead of having somebody sit down and answer a 300 question questionnaire multiple times a week.
Not
If
looking
you can,
forward to that, are you?
if you can hear the insanity in my voice, it's because of things like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think another like what next? Like what else could we be seeing coming this year and or next would be models that are trained on all of this data about tariffs and to perhaps predict some shifts in economy based on that. And I think that you could see this not in like an AI telling us this, but basically a bunch of companies in China having to close their doors because what they were making is no longer being purchased by Americans, and that was who their audience was. So I think this trade wars had an unintended consequence for manufacturing, or maybe it was an intended consequence. I'm not quite sure yet. Well, I guess we'll see. But seeing these businesses go out of business in China because, who was buying their products? We aren't buying them anymore. And I would also say Gen AI is being used in a lot of different places, but I think we're going to start seeing it used more in business ops, specifically around like reviewing contracts, like trade agreements, analysis type things. And I'm not going to say that this isn't being used today because I know some people are leveraging Gen AI for contract review. But I think what you're going to see is a lot more like uh, focus on that. So just something for people to keep an eye on as far as like what could be next in this topic. So I'm thinking, Mark, we've probably covered a lot of ground here, and I think some of the key takeaways for our audience is like if I'm looking at the manufacturing use case, I would say it isn't just about AI being present on a factory floor in those manufacturing machines. It's about making smarter decisions. And I think some of those smarter decisions start at the boardroom. So I don't think we're going to fix all of this with models and computer vision and all of those types of things. I really do think it's going to come down to manufacturing companies doing very similarly to what our customer is doing, which is exploring the art of the possible and spending a little bit more time on that piece of it. So I will say one thing that we would like to offer as part of this podcast, and we don't always do something like this, but I think in this instance, we've talked a lot about AI. We have some manufacturing customers that are listeners and adjacent, I would say, even in healthcare. So if we have some other verticals, but what we're looking at is having a downloadable checklist for you where you can go and start to look at some basic AI readiness components. So we're going to have one for manufacturing and we're going to have one for a couple of other industries. So we're going to make a link available so you can go and check it out because that's something that we get asked for a lot, which is, are we ready to make some of these decisions in AI? And we want to help a little bit. So take a look for that. But before we go, Mark, any other sage advice or wisdom or anything you want to talk about?
No, I think I covered the main ones. Just, I mean, a big part of this that shows checklist is the security component, which is you don't have to wait to do those, which is good. In fact, they're best practices in many cases, which our clients are like, oh, we've been talking about doing that. Now it gives them more of a reason to do it because it helps them tie it to business forward momentum, which I think would be a great thing. But being able to take advantage of that um, for those compliance reasons, and really you're helping save money by paving the way as security as opposed to or lighting the path. There's all the terminologies, but I think security should absolutely be helping with that and not the naysayers, right? They should be the yes, but let's do it the right way, the safe way, the proper way, as as they help define with the business. So
Right.
yeah,
What do we call that? We call that yes and.
yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today for the State of Enterprise IT Security Edition, and we'll see you next time.